Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 7, Health and the Laws of Physical Life from Questions and Answers, Fundamentals of the Occult Sciences by Manly P. Hall. Health and the Laws of Physical Life, Part 7. What are the laws of health? Health is normalcy, and all that promotes normalcy promotes health. The classical philosophers define health as the natural state of man, viewing sickness and disease as the results of ignorance and intemperance. Health is not merely physical integrity, it is the harmony of the inner life manifesting through the physical organism. Most of the ills of the flesh can be traced to wrong thinking and undisciplined emotion. It would not be right, however, to teach that health can be achieved through inhibiting and repressing. It would be more correct to say that health can be achieved by intelligent direction, in which the energies of life are directed into channels of constructive and appropriate expression. Every normal human being desires to express himself, and in every life there are secret hopes and aspirations. To choose some constructive and worthy aim and to live towards it, dedicating the life and thought towards accomplishment, is to find happiness and usually a higher degree of physical health. Purposeless people are sick with and of themselves. People struggling after unworthy ambitions are diseased by the falseness of their purpose. And people living down to a code unworthy of them are disintegrating themselves by retrogressive feeling and thinking. A few simple rules may help the metaphysician to live up to the standards which he himself has recognized as suitable and consistent. 1. Preserve the normalcy of the body by obeying the rudimentary laws of health: sanitation, exercise, ventilation, and healthful environment. 2. Preserve the functions of the body through reasonable methods of eating with a special attention to the problem of elimination. 3. Normalize relationships with environment and other people. If it is impossible to be where we desire to be and among people we desire to know, the individual must rise above his natural tendency to dissatisfaction and accomplish serenity where he is, among the people with whom he is associated. 4. Every effort should be made to refine and beautify the emotions and feelings. Grief, hate, jealousy, envy, self-pity, and all the morbid, hysterical emotions must be redirected if anything resembling normal health is to be expected. Usually emotions can find constructive and natural expression through aesthetics or one of the arts or good, constructive and strenuous work. 5. Irrationalities of the mind must also be tempered with moderation. Lives filled with schemes, excuses and melancholies contribute little to security. Worries, griefs and morbid anticipations bring about a fulfillment of themselves at the expense of the health. 6. Complexes and fixations arising in the subconscious mind must also be worked with and overcome. Habits, easy through long usage, must often be corrected. Nearly every person carries throughout life irascibilities which are termed temperament and which he believes cannot be overcome. Everything can be overcome, but it may require considerable effort over a long period of time. A person who desires to be well must conquer the tendencies in his living which destroy health. Health is that which remains when the stupidities of man have been removed by intelligent effort. The human being cannot create health or force a condition of physical well-being. Health is one of the results of wisdom, and only the wise can be truly well. What do you advise on the subject of diet? It appears in practice that extreme attitudes towards food are productive of dyspepsia rather than health. A few simple rules may suggest a wise and balanced approach. 1. Eat moderately, remembering that most foods are digestible in reasonable quantities, and the amount eaten is more likely to cause trouble than any particular food product. 2. Eat according to the work you are doing, emphasizing such food products as are known to provide the type of energy suited to your occupation or profession. 3. Eat a moderate variety of foods, but do not mix incompatible elements in any single meal. 4. Unless you are suffering from some particular disease aggravated by certain kinds of foods, eat moderately of what you like, for miserable and unattractive combinations are seldom beneficial. 5. Try to eat regularly. If your present eating does not seem satisfactory, try increasing the number of meals and decreasing the amount of food eaten at each. Herbivorous animals in particular nibble most of the time, And if it produces contented cows, it may have unsuspected virtues for mankind. This formula is of especial value to people of very small appetite and anemic tendencies. 6. As important as the quality of food is its attractiveness of appearance and the environment in which it is eaten. The proper digestion of food demands that the system develop a pleasant anticipation, and the eyes are ministers to the gastric juices. 7. Simple foods, not highly seasoned, are usually the most healthful, and to those of normal appetite the most welcome. The modern tendency to complicate cuisine and to have a large number of courses to the meal work hardship upon the digestive processes. One of the ancient laws of health was that a person living in a community should eat the foods of his community and should vary his menu with the seasons, eating at each season the foods natural to that season, thus equipping the body to meet the external factors of climate and temperature. 8. We hear a great deal of talk about getting back to natural foods, but it should be remembered that man has been away from primitive spinach and raw meat for many thousands of years, and to suddenly adjust a system that has been reared on artificial foods to some hearty Pliocene eating often proves disastrous. The body adjusts slowly, and having come to some particular rhythm, resists efforts to change its function and should be worked with carefully and patiently. 9. The philosopher is not generally one of those food-conscious individuals who is constantly worrying about his calories, his carbohydrates, or his vitamins. He realizes that it is not the duty of the evolved human being to keep his mind forever on his stomach, wasting years of thinking on the mere simple process of feeding himself. Choose a simple, reasonable and pleasant diet and free the intellect to work on the great problems of the hour. 10. If it be true that a man digs his grave with his teeth, it is equally true that most mortals worry, fear, and plague themselves into an early grave, wrestling with problems of small merit and consequence. From the earliest times, religious institutions have regarded diet as an important aspect of spiritual culture. The systems of eating recommended by these various groups differ in some parts, but for the most part, agree on the essential principles. All religious and philosophical schools have warned against overeating as the worst of dietetic evils. Too much food and elaborate and complicated menus receive the weight of general censure. The Pythagoreans advised moderation and simplicity, and the followers of the school enjoyed extraordinary health and longevity. According to the tradition, Pythagoras himself, when nearly 100 years of age, had the strength and endurance of a youth in his 20s. Apollonius of Tyana, who followed the Pythagorean disciplines, was in his prime physically and mentally at the age of 100. A reasonable viewpoint on this subject for modern consideration would emphasize the evil of excess, with one reservation. Diets for the philosophically minded should not be imposed upon growing children who require much more of food than persons of mature years. Overfeeding after middle life is particularly unfortunate, and it has been scientifically proven that the body survives longer on hunger than it does on satiety. The wise course is to discover the minimum upon which the body flourishes and adhere to it. As to the nature of that which is to be eaten, there is less uniformity of belief. Various races have food staples which are accepted as indispensable, but again there is agreement that foods which undergo elaborate processes of refinement or cooking are to be avoided. Most religious diets work for energy-building foods with low starch content. Pythagoras advised grain, cheese, fruit and vegetables which mature above the ground, nor does he seem to have condemned the eating of meat. But he advised magistrates to refrain from eating meat for 24 hours previous to decisions in court, etc., for the sake of mental clarity. Generally speaking, a moderate, well-balanced meal of natural foods is suitable for general use, but no elaborate departure should be made from eating habits without the assistance of a skilled dietitian. The various abnormalities of body chemistry present in nearly every person living in our peculiar social system should never be overlooked when planning a diet. Extensive fasting was discouraged among the more philosophic sects, although the entirely devout frequently starved themselves to death. If the amount of food necessary to the bodily economy is skillfully gauged, there is no need of fasting to clean out the system. Some of the old schools taught that the clarity of the reason was improved by abstaining from food one day each week and eating a normal amount the rest of the time. The Mohammedan fast of Ramadan was instituted as a physical aid to the spiritual life due to the rather intemperate eating of the Muslim world. There is no food panacea for the evils of the soul. No man shall reach heaven by dieting alone. The ability of the human being to function at a maximum of efficiency demands the proper fueling for his physical engine. It has generally been observed that if a person interested in metaphysical matters uses a general moderation in his eating, the law of natural selection will gradually assert itself. A person doing intensive mental work will naturally rebel against the sluggishness caused by the overeating of coarse, low-vibration foods. The diet will be corrected by the inward tendencies of the mind and life. Occasionally we meet a person who regards himself as a very advanced metaphysician, who at the same time is wrestling with the diet demon. The fact is that no one highly advanced in metaphysical matters will have any such conflict. The diet will be determined not by the appetites, but by the chemistry which philosophy has set up in the bodily organisms. Do not steel yourself against eating things which you believe are inconsistent with philosophy. Rather perfect the philosophy and you will find that natural selection will cause you to finally eat that which is useful to you. In the average person, unfortunately, the law of natural selection is obscured by the artificiality of the conditions under which we live. As Socrates so wisely observed, moderation is the cornerstone of the virtues. Nor should we forget the entirely significant words of the Nazarene teacher. It is not that which goeth in at the mouth that defileth a man, it is that which cometh out of the mouth that defileth a man. Do you recommend fasting as a means of advancing spiritually? According to the opinion of H.G. Wells, Gautama Buddha was one of the 3 greatest men who have ever lived upon the earth. Buddha's experience in fasting therefore should be of interest and significance to all students of philosophy. When Buddha set forth on his quest for enlightenment, he followed the Brahmin disciple of his time, giving himself over to extreme austerities of the flesh. He performed elaborate fastings for the purification of his soul until, at last, dying from starvation, he sank down exhausted by the side of the Indian road. His years of self-sacrifice and suffering had failed utterly to bring him the illumination that he sought. Realizing his failure, Buddha ate a hearty meal and gave up the penitent path of starvation. It was only after he had restored the health and normalcy of his physical body that illumination came to him. It is true that fasting will stimulate the psychical powers by breaking down body resistance. But the way to true wisdom is not through psychism, but through the normalizing and perfecting of every part of the nature. In matters of food, the Socratic axiom is admirable. In all things, not too much. Moderation and not abstinence is normalcy. The theory of starving to death for the glory of God belongs to the old era of superstitions. The philosopher of today realizes that the law of life is not fulfilled through misery and suffering, but that the universal plan is perfected by the health, happiness, and well-being of all creatures. Do parents give their progeny only physical bodies? The old wisdom teachings reject what is commonly known as the law of heredity, explaining that the phenomena generally ascribed to heredity has its real source in reincarnation and karma. By the law of attraction, the ego at birth is drawn into an environment similar to itself and suitable for the working out of its karma. Thus, an entity whose karma it is to suffer the experience of tuberculosis will be drawn into a tubercular family where it will receive a body susceptible to this disease. Science says that we do not inherit disease, but tendency to disease. Thus, parental environment and physical heredity are the instruments of the universal justice. Children resemble their parents in temperament because entities of similar temperaments incarnate in similar families and environments by the natural law that like attracts like. What should be the attitude of the occult student towards surgery? Persons of all beliefs approach surgery with a common dread. The intelligence of the individual warns him that the human body is an extremely delicate mechanism which seldom fully recovers from major surgery. The physical man is a masterpiece of natural economy. All the organs and parts of the body have a particular duty to perform, and removal of any organ or part is bound to influence the vibratory and chemical balance of the whole structure. Several ancient peoples, most notably the Greeks, held all surgery and dissection in disfavor, declaring it to be a sacrilege against the gods and the human soul to mutilate its house, either in life or after death. It is for this reason that the Greeks never achieved any high proficiency in anatomy, but did accomplish much in clinical medicine. The clinics of Hippocrates contained hundreds of patients under constant observation, but the physicians gathered there possessed only the most rudimentary knowledge of the organs of the body, their location and general structure. Of late years, surgery has become more or less of a medical fad, and prominent surgeons have grown wealthy off the exorbitant fees which they charge for even the most minor operations. The average sick person, having little knowledge of his own functions, is intimidated into surgery through high-pressure business methods. On the other hand, there are many people living lives of comparative comfort and efficiency who would be dead had not surgery rescued them from some physical extremity. Philosophically speaking, it seems to me that the matter can be summarized something thus. The purpose of life is experience. Under normal conditions, the perpetuation of life offers opportunity for growth and usefulness. It is the duty of the individual, therefore, to perpetuate life as long as there is any reasonable probability of the restoration of comparative health. To fail in this respect and perhaps to die rather than to use the scientific means available to prolong life would not be regarded as a philosophical virtue, but is technically speaking suicide. Philosophy will permit, therefore, the use of surgery when other means have failed, and surgery is the last recourse. Philosophy would invite each truth seeker to live as nearly as possible in harmony with the laws of health, but in an emergency would regard the perpetuation of life as more important than anti-surgical prejudices. What is your advice in the matters of eugenics and birth control? In past centuries, it was the opinion of good Orthodox people that children were the gift of divine providence, and that the largeness or smallness of a family depended entirely on celestial and theological factors. Also, less strenuous economic periods, with agriculture as the principal element in the economic system, favored large families and ensured reasonable opportunities of health and usefulness. Most ancient nations valued the institution of the home, honored parenthood, and encouraged early marriages and numerous offspring. Conditions have considerably changed. The human soul is faced with a new cycle of experiences. The home has broken down, human relationships are particularly insecure, and parents are ever less willing to sacrifice their own interests for the arduous and uncertain task of rearing families. Also, there is a realization arising in a considerable block of the public mind that there are enough people in the world, in fact so many, that half of the living are starving to death. Society is now bringing to bear an innumerable array of influences to discourage large families, which increase the hazards of child rearing. In substance, the difficulties are as follows: the heavy cost of bringing children into the world, the prohibitive cost of educating them, and the prohibitive cost of giving them a reasonable place in the social system. It has been estimated that the average child costs $10,000 to bring to the age of majority with what may be termed the proper advantages of his day. This is many years' salary for the average working man. Not only years of work, but years of worry and anxiety, self-denial and sacrifice. And after all this has been accomplished, the young hopeful may be drafted into an army and be one of those thousands who die at dawn and lie in unmarked graves. As man thinks things through, as science and philosophy instruct him in life's probabilities, he cannot be entirely blamed if his optimism fails in the presence of a wide array of discouraging facts. The whole matter is well shown in the young people growing up through the Depression. Many of them want to be married, establish homes, and raise families. But the money hazards render these normal impulses not only impractical, but impossible. The world conspires against the individual, apparently doing everything possible to make life difficult and hazardous. A society which cannot protect life offers small incentive for families and family sentiments. Another important element is the increasing morality and criminal degeneracy, which results from man's inhumanity to man. It has been estimated that 1 out of 5 of the population must be considered as subnormal, and the number of criminals in America alone is simply unbelievable, actually running into the millions. When underprivileged people marry, Their limitations are stamped upon their progeny, creating more and more problems for society to solve. It has been advanced that the sterilization of the unfit would be a major step forward in coping with degeneracy and disease. From an occult standpoint, I cannot see that this would violate any fundamental law. In the first place, it would improve the general tone of society, giving a better grade of entities opportunities to incarnate. And in the second place, it would not limit the incarnation of lower grades of entities for the reason that there are innumerable divisions among the lower brackets of civilization for the incoming of less evolved types. Actually, degeneracy is not natural. That which is natural is right, and it is natural that man coming into incarnation should find a reasonably healthy vehicle for his manifestation. The karma that he causes by functioning through an inappropriate body could be prevented if he had a better vehicle to work with, a better environment to grow up in, and a better world to live in. According to Buddhism, a cause once set into motion must produce an effect. But if the cause is prevented, the effect is also prevented. At the present time, large families are principally limited to the lower classes of society. The large families of the poor are proverbial, and the charitable resources of the community are taxed to the breaking point by the biological optimism of the impoverished. Considerable religious prejudice still contributes to this unfair and unreasonable state of things. It would be far better to bring up 1 or 2 children in reasonable security than to attempt the almost impossible task of raising up a dozen in a condition of mutual malnutrition. Law must take the place of philosophy until the individual achieves to common sense in his own life. A wider teaching of the principles of eugenics and birth control, particularly among poorer people of society, could only result in better homes and better advantages for both parents and children. While it is true that the perpetuation of the race depends upon the home and family, it is also true that man, having risen above the animal in many other things, is not merely a breeder. The family relationships have been elevated above animal standards of breeding, and it is proper that philosophy, aesthetics, and culture should flourish together in the life of man and should refine all of his physical processes. What is spiritual or faith healing, and is it ethical? The use of superphysical forces or of superphysical means to restore the physical health of the body is properly called spiritual or faith healing. There are several forms of metaphysical healing: by prayer, by suggestion, by magnetism or hypnosis, or by individual or collective concentrated thought directed to the patient. There are also forms of spiritual healing making use of decarnate entities, elementals, and on rare occasions the control and direction of the subtle forces of nature by initiates and adepts. Metaphysical healing derives its authority directly from divine revelation. The founders of nearly all great religious movements, with the possible exception of Muhammad, are all accredited with possessing a supernatural power. In most cases, miracles are attributed to them. What pious Christian would deny the power of faith over disease when their own Savior had raised the dead, opened the eyes of the blind, and had given to his disciples power to heal the sick in his name? The problem of miracles leaves materia medica and theology in a deadlock. Although the Protestant clergy did not assert its privilege of treating disease by virtue of the admonition of its founder, it was certainly sympathetic to the idea that God could bestow at his pleasure a curative virtue upon individuals untrained in medical science. Many of our medical specialists disagree, but must state their opinions in a modulated voice lest they lose patients. When the student of philosophy first exchanges the fallacies of theology for the ordered life of the wise, he is apt to find himself upon the horns of a dilemma. He learns that the universe is controlled by law, absolute and immutable, realizing the world to be no respecter of persons, and himself to be surrounded by principles of such cosmic magnitude that he is scarcely an equation in their activity. He may be excused if at first he verges unduly towards fatalism. A fatalistic attitude has a tendency to dilute the milk of human kindness. For if an individual is in the place that he has earned for himself, as philosophy certainly affirms, and is surrounded by experiences necessary to the development of his character, should another turn from his own pursuits and interfere with the laws of destiny by helping this fellow creature over a rough spot in the road of life? In fact, Is it really possible to save a person from an experience through which fate has decreed that he should pass? The law of compensation or karma, which is simply the principle of cause and effect applied to the individualized destinies of men, decrees that as we sow, so shall we reap. It is difficult for the average person to affirm this doctrine without a dulling effect upon the fine edge of sympathy, creating a sense of hopelessness in the face of a dominating providence. Theologies are more or less emotional revolts against the exactness of philosophic law. People like to believe that they can escape consequences by the patented processes of the clergy. To the theologically minded, the fine points of philosophy are of no great consequence, for they can explain themselves both out of hell and into heaven, and through all sorts of temporal dilemmas with amazing ease. It is the individual who, weighing the apparent contradictions, desires to hew as closely as possible to the line of right, is most sorely perplexed. Such questions as these are often asked: does a physician who cures some disorder of the flesh oppose the law of nature and commit a grievous wrong? Should we try to heal others of their afflictions, or should we leave them to their own resources? It is permissible for us to save a life when without our intervention it would certainly be lost. Is magnetic healing black magic? Is hypnotism ever justifiable? Should spiritual forces be used in an effort to correct physical ills? To clarify these matters, let us first of all try to understand the nature or substance of disease. Buddha says that all the evils to which the flesh is heir have their common origin in ignorance. Ignorance is almost synonymous with unbalance, for wisdom and equilibrium are certainly closely related terms. Disease is an unnatural state to a creature living a natural existence and, being inconsistent to the latter state, does not manifest there. To creatures which live unnaturally and surround themselves with artificial circumstances, disease is natural, for cause and effect decrees that normalcy shall generate normalcy and abnormality produce its kind. Hence all disease is seated in some shortcoming which opens the individual to such afflictions. The illnesses which may afflict mankind can exist on any of three planes: mental, emotional and physical. And through the afflictions set up on one of these planes, the rest of the nature may be infested so that finally the whole structure collapses. When we speak of mental diseases, we do not necessarily mean insanity, but any excess of thought, for scheming and plotting and deceit. In fact, the holding of any unkind or destructive attitude is sufficient to disease the whole organism and rack the body with a score of pains. By emotional diseases, we mean to infer any excesses of hate, jealousy, or even such apparently worthy emotions as piety and affection. For these, if pushed to the point of a vice, are as dangerous as anger or lust. Physical diseases are too numerous and well known to need description. They are a diversified host of ills, a great percentage of which are traceable to a mental or emotional source. Only a small percentage belong definitely to the intemperances of the flesh. According to philosophy, a physician is capable of treating a disease for one of two definite ends. First, to achieve a complete cure. Second, to effect a temporary healing in which the patient is released from an imminent crisis, but must ultimately face the situation again. The occult physician knows that to accomplish a complete cure, he must stamp out the intemperance at its root. He must find the source of the condition and work the problem out on its own plane of activity. If the trouble is referable to some idiosyncrasy, there is no use giving pills. The condition must be worked out upon the mental plane. If an emotional excess is the cause of the disorder, then upon the emotional plane must the correction be made. Again, physical ailments must be treated with physical remedies. Of course, the physician cannot hope to effect a complete cure without the intelligent cooperation of the patient. By correcting the excesses which the wise physician has diagnosed as responsible for the ailment, the matter is entirely cleared up, for the cause being removed can no longer generate effects. No one can expect to be well who has unnatural attitudes, feelings, or appetites. This both the physician and the patient must realize. The healer will not go far astray if he makes it his unalterable rule to work out his patient's problems with the means common to the plane upon which those problems exist. For instance, if the seat of the disorder is diagnosed as purely physical, use natural physical means to correct the condition. In other words, if it is discovered that the patient has a vertebra out of place, the course to be pursued is evident. Do not sit around affirming that the vertebra is back in its natural position or engage a spiritual healer to give treatments, absent or otherwise. Do not hold the thought and pray for an invisible adept or try to enlist the services of an archangel. Go to a good osteopath and have it put back, in this way greatly conserving the spiritual resources of the universe. Spiritual forces should be used for spiritual problems, mental forces for mental problems, emotional forces for emotional problems, and physical forces for physical problems. To divert a force to some illegitimate end is equivalent to sorcery. What the herbs of the fields are to the body, beauty is to the emotions, and rationality to the mind. To divert mental forces to the achievement of physical ends is a perversion of power, for it binds the greater to the lesser. The mind, for example, is unquestionably capable of controlling the body, and by virtue of that sovereignty can mold the body into its purposes. You can stop pain by mental power, and every day we hear of wonderful results obtained by mental healing. But in the process, a sacred treaty between the parts of man has been violated. Force, not reason, has accomplished the result. The demands of the body have not been met. Mind has ridden roughshod over the laws of matter. Black magic must be the term applied where might instead of right achieves the desired end. It often occurs that the physician is brought into the presence of a critical state in which the cooperation of the patient cannot be expected. The laws of mercy demand an immediate action. Under such conditions, a cure is not the object, for a cure is impossible until the patient can cure himself. The physician can only direct. Under such conditions, the main purpose is to assist the sufferer over the immediate condition in order that he may be given an opportunity to work out his problem under less acute circumstances. If the patient should die of the disease, he must reincarnate again, and thus create a new opportunity to work out the problem. The physician who can preserve the life of his patient and give him an earlier opportunity to cope with his extremity thus contributes to the economy of nature. Technically, a physician cannot interfere with karma, he can only delay its processes. Considering the employment of hypnosis, we will suppose that an individual is suffering from a drug habit, hypnosis being used particularly in the treatment of this as well as other undesirable habits. As the result of hypnosis, the patient loses all interest in narcotics and lives the life of a peaceful and useful citizen. Philosophy teaches that this person has not actually escaped from the drug habit. He has only been given a respite, but the problem is presented to him again, possibly in a different way, until the weakness of that particular tendency is overcome. Much good has been accomplished, however, for a long chain of potential bad karma has been prevented. If the habit were not cured, a great deal more bad karma would have been generated. The habit might have led to excesses and even to crime, for evils multiply more rapidly than the proverbial guinea pigs. Philosophy teaches that while we can escape such karma as we have already earned for ourselves, we can also stop making new karma which will overshadow the future. We have no right to interfere with the workings of the law, but as the Buddha so beautifully taught, we are privileged to free ourselves from unpleasant reactions by becoming too wise to do those things which cause future suffering. We are privileged to assist others in this respect also. Hypnosis should never be regarded as a cure, and occultism in no way advocates its promiscuous use. In fact, occult science discourages all metaphysical processes, reserving such for conditions where every simple natural method has failed. Every physician who uses spiritual methods of healing should unfailingly warn his patient that such methods are in no sense substitutes for the correction of the cause of the ailment. The healer should explain the principles of natural and normal living and demand intelligent cooperation on the part of the sufferer. In late years, metaphysical healing has become a popular substitute for individual integrity. The healer has taken the place of the priest who once served out redemption through grace. To benumb one's sense of individual responsibility and depend upon some spiritual healer for health, happiness, and normalcy is to court inevitable disaster. Such things cannot be. A healer is not greater than the law, and while he may be sufficiently gifted to produce extraordinary results, nature inevitably reasserts itself, and only that which is real will survive. The gods revealed the art of healing at the very beginning of civilization. Humanity, incapable of applying all the principles of health, hobbles along with the aid of a crutch, for lack of which they might otherwise fall by the way. Crutches at best are unsatisfactory, however, and true health is the only utterly desirable state. the spiritual healer who with gentleness of spirit offers his powers for the mending of broken lives, gives himself to a very beautiful task. But woe to the one who attempts to exert force and create desired conditions through the sheer force of will. Such a person is dealing in sorcery, whether the actual purposes are malevolent or benevolent. The healer must take the attitude of impelling but never compelling any conditions which he desires to bring about. It is wise for him to ever keep in mind that not his will but the greatest ultimate good must be done. Why is it that child prodigies are usually burned out by the time they mature? Why do they not go on developing? The phenomenon which we call a prodigy in most cases is the result of the unbalance of the endocrine system. The pineal gland controls the flow of mental energy from the ego to the physical brain. Improper function of this gland may produce the appearance of premature development and maturity. Usually, however, the physical body is incapable of sustaining the strain of premature activity, and the abnormal condition finally results in the brain or the body breaking down. Children from the 5th to 15th year are in the growing periods. During this time, a considerable part of the vital reserve of the body must be expended in building bone, flesh, nerve, and muscle. If during this period glandular unbalance throws a heavy mental or emotional strain upon the body, the vital resources are divided. This results in the final weakening of both the mental and physical processes. Most parents think children are clever if they seem old beyond their years. But the efficiency of the mature individual depends to a great measure upon the normalcy of the childhood and adolescent periods. What effect has the use of medicinal drugs on the physical body, the inner bodies and centers, and the evolution of the ego? Nearly all narcotic drugs directly affect the nervous system, which is the link connecting the consciousness with the physical body. By forcing the condition of sleep, they cause the separation of the higher etheric and astral bodies from the lower etheric and dense physical form. The effect of all drugs upon the physical body is, to a certain degree, destructive. They cause a struggle in the system in which the life within the body battles against and finally overcomes the foreign substances introduced. In some cases, however, they are legitimate, inasmuch as they prevent a greater struggle occurring as the result of pain or insomnia. They produce but a very slight effect in the invisible bodies, and to a slight degree slow down temporarily the whirling vortices or centers. But of course, no physical substance is capable of injuring the ego itself other than by a reflex. The only danger is the possibility of the drug causing a negative condition in the physical body, which makes the active operation of the spirit through the body difficult. Is there any virtue in sleeping with the head to the north, south, east, or west? As all the occult mysteries have written, man is a miniature world, and the magnetic currents of his body correspond with the vaster currents moving about and through the earth. It would naturally follow that if man harmonizes the direction of the flow of his own energies with the flow of the energies of the earth, he will avoid conflict between his own life and the life of the world. In the northern hemisphere, it is proper to sleep with the head to the north, so that the magnetic currents flow parallel with the spine. In the southern hemisphere, the head should be to the south, and in the equatorial zone, the head should be to the east. Experimentation has proven that by following this rule, rest is more perfect, and in some cases relief has been found for restless sleeping, confused dreams, and insomnia. It would be wrong to say that failure to follow this rule would prevent sleep or endanger the individual. But there is a certain added benefit which results from cooperating with nature in every possible way. Of course, to sleep with one's head in the right direction does not produce spirituality. It merely increases body normalcy, in this way giving added vitality and efficiency which through proper direction may contribute to spiritual improvement. What is the best way to overcome an obsession? The word obsession has two meanings at the present time. Occultly speaking, an obsession is a form of possession in which a living person is overshadowed or dominated by the intelligence of another entity. Most often, the other entity is decarnate. Psychologically speaking, an obsession is a fixation in which the natural flow of the intellect is deflected, or perverted by some idea or notion which has come to dominate the reasoning processes. In the case of true obsession, it is my observation that certain physical derangements are usually present. Persons of normal mental attitudes, well-directed emotions, and healthy physical bodies are seldom obsessed. Obsessions most generally occur as the result of dabbling in occult sciences, years of emotional excess or repression, and a condition of anemia in the body chemistry. It follows that if the obsessed person has periods of lucidity and self-control, he should be set to work normalizing his life. Where the obsession is continuous and the patient can offer no personal assistance, those treating the obsession must do everything possible to normalize the patient without his assistance. The resistance of the physical body must be brought up, but at the same time it is dangerous to feed an obsessed person animal foods. Obsessing entities are usually of a lower moral and mental caliber than the person whom they attack, but in order for the obsession to continue, there must be a negative link of sympathy between the entity obsessing and the person obsessed. This link of sympathy must be sought for and removed. A serious case of obsession will not generally respond to amateur treatment, but must be worked on by a person experienced in occult therapeutics. Mild cases arising from mediumship can generally be remedied by the sufferer himself if he will reorganize his spiritual life and place it on a strong individual foundation. Thought power is a great force in working with obsessions, and constructive thought, regularly directed to the sufferer by a group of sympathetic people, has been known to work wonders. In no case, however, should these thought impulses be sent forth in a destructive way, even against the obsessing entity, for we do not fight evil with evil, but evil with good. Is rejuvenation or physical immortality possible or desirable? Is it true that men should live much longer than most do at the present time? From the earliest traditions of the race have descended strange accounts of men who have defied the laws of age and have extended their physical existence over vast periods of time. In this day when most people find so much to live for and learn the art of living so late in life, the matter of physical immortality assumes the proportions of a vital issue. Even science, conservative for the most part in its announcements, hints that the time may not be far off when the evils of age and decrepitude may be done away with and all men live together in a world of perpetual youth. This state should be regarded as a dream rather than a hope. But dreams, though slower of fulfillment than hopes, may in time come true. The matter of rejuvenation as it now stands is no magic formula of physical immortality, but rather an effort to increase the normal span of human usefulness to a term more reasonable to the state of man. The human being, the most intelligent of the animals, is surrounded by inferior creatures whose span of life is much greater than his own. It does seem a little strange that man can have but 70 years of usefulness, and the whale can sport for centuries in his ocean home. The only conclusions that seem reasonable indicate that man, through his unintelligent theory of living, shortens his own span and heaps upon himself most of the infirmities that corrupt his later years. There is no reason why man should not enjoy good health. Even under present conditions, for at least 1 full century and 500 years would not be too long a life for man to visualize as a normal period. Of course, man, being the only animal with the capacity for worrying, tears down much of his life by his critical and destructive thinking. Civilization, so-called, does the rest, being the most completely destructive mechanism ever devised by juvenile intelligence. It would be wrong to say that physical immortality is probable or even possible to average persons in the modern world. We believe that something resembling physical immortality has been accomplished by the great adepts and initiates who have mastered the secrets of life, but their accomplishment in no way justifies ordinary men and women in expecting eternal youth. Several metaphysical cults and isms have preached physical immortality and have even tried to conceal the death of their leaders, but none of these groups has yet been able, even temporarily, to cheat the grave. The average citizen of the modern world may look forward to an increasing knowledge concerning the laws of life and a consistent program for the lengthening of human life by scientific means. Only a very highly advanced metaphysician can reasonably expect more than the scientific form of rejuvenation. But by the end of the present century, there is every reason to believe that methods will be perfected to add from 10 to 20 years of useful and efficient living to the average person's mortal span. As to the desirability of eternal life, one has only to read the story of the Wandering Jew by Eugene Sue to get an excellent psychological picture of the curse of eternal physical existence. The body is the prison of the spirit, and it is a foolish man who would choose to spend eternity in prison. Eternal physical existence is not a possibility. The universe could allow no such tragedy to occur. Even the worlds are forever coming and going, and there is nothing eternal but spirit and space. Every reasonable method of extending physical life to the fullest of its potential span may be regarded as progressive and constructive. But to dream of an endless living in this veil shows little vision of the greater purposes of life and evolution. A man of letters not long ago hazarded the opinion that, considering the length of time devoted to the periods of development and growth, the human being should live about 400 years. Strangely enough, there is no historical example of a human being achieving this length of life in the last several thousands of years. Of course, in the metaphysical traditions we find records of what Thomas Vaughan, the Rosicrucian initiate, called long livers. But the occult tradition is not accepted by modern science. There are records, however, of men whose lives have exceeded 200 years, and a goodly number who have reached 150. China has produced an unusual number of very aged persons. And it might be well to consider some of the factors involved in the achievement of an unusual span of life. Two factors, of course, immediately present themselves. In the first place, some achieve great age by virtue of constitution. The body seems to be born with an unusual capacity for endurance. The second factor is cultivation and discipline. By a certain program of carefully studied action, the natural span is increased and efficiency continued far beyond the generally accepted boundaries. The Chinese formula for longevity is extremely simple and has unusual merit in the light of our present uncertain generation. The Taoists of China, among whom are to be found a host of centenarians, gave as the first key to extensive living the formula: do not worry. To use an old adage, most people use up the second half of life in the first half. Excesses of emotion, inordinate ambitions, the psychological acceptance of responsibilities, attachments, and all the vast army of concerns which bow us down carve huge slices from our later years. Every time we become fussed and bothered, we shorten life and destroy the tranquility of the years we do not destroy. In the Taoist belief, nothing is important. In their opinion, the worst thing that can happen to anyone is to die. And that is not important anyway. There is nothing worth fretting over or hastening after. Things you do not have are responsibilities escaped. High rank you cannot achieve is disaster avoided. Man's wants are many, but his needs are few, and the Taoist makes the goal of his life to live without effort, without stress and without strain. He moves slowly and methodically, without tension and without nerves, to whatever end he desires to accomplish, always careful that his ends are few. If a Taoist by some miracle finds himself in a position of responsibility, his first task is to remove the consciousness of responsibility in himself. Wherever he is unconcerned. He does everything as wisely as he can, and then immediately dismisses the entire matter from his mind. Rich or poor, befriended or alone, old or young, he lives in the same sense of detachment. He wastes no energy and permits nothing to irritate him. In this way, he overcomes most of the causes of rapid decay. Very few people wear out, most of them rot out. The life is corroded by acids of disposition. Strength is wasted towards ends that are not real or valuable. Most men die from the exhaustion attendant upon the effort to live. But the Chinese sage lives without effort. He seldom practices great physical exercise. In fact, he avoids every type of exertion. He never wonders about what he does or fears the results of his thoughts or deeds. He lives by a formula of right. He never departs from it, and he never concerns himself with evils that may come to him. With this formula, he may find himself hale and hearty at 150, frequently sought for advice, regarded as a paragon of the virtues, and entirely comfortable. Another way of stating the Taoist formula is that every individual should be like water, for this fluid fits itself into any container without discomfort, flows into low and simple places without despair, and in the end mingles with the universal waters without regret. Placidity is power, relaxation is length of years, detachment is health. To sum up, it is only a Taoist or one of similar accomplishment who takes the sting out of life and is fitted to endure the years. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment. And if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses, links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.